Thanks for tuning in today. Today we are going to be looking at something that's very important to developing concepts in algebra, and that is axes, quadrants, and graphing on an xy coordinate plane. XY coordinate plane, another word for that is the Cartesian plane. So we'll be looking at the Cartesian plane today as well. But before we get started, let's go ahead and read this paragraph together so we can kind of get some context for what we'll be looking at today. So for starters, we have coordinate axes on a flat surface are formed by drawing vertical and horizontal lines that meet at 0. You'll notice I'm marking that on the graph. And we'll also see here that these are at a 90-degree angle. Here is our 90-degree angle. Okay. So we have the x-axis, which is our horizontal axis. We have our x-axis here. And if this is our x-axis, by default we know that this is our y-axis. So we will always move x directions horizontally, and we will move y directions vertically, just as shown in our 4-quadrant graph here. Okay. It's important to know as well that when we look at the Cartesian plane, you might get some problems that ask you, in which quadrant are we graphing points? The quadrants are labeled for you here. You'll notice we have quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. It's kind of counterintuitive. We're not doing it clockwise, or the order we're doing it is actually counterclockwise. You can look at your specific Cartesian plane that you draw and just remember that we are going to number our axes in a counterclockwise fashion. If we were just graphing in the first quadrant, this is what our graph would look like. Again, x and y axes stay the same, and then we know that this graph continues down here, and this would be our second quadrant, our third quadrant, and our fourth quadrant. And then again, this is our first quadrant. Okay, moving right along. So we're going to go through a couple examples. I'm not going to go through and read this text because I don't think it's very important, because it's basically what we're going to do right over here in the corner. So I'm going to draw a quick graph for us. If you can remember, go ahead and label your axes. Label the x-axis first, and then the y-axis. If you can't quite remember, go ahead and pause and move back, rewind the video so that you can go back and see. So we should have labeled our x-axis and our y-axis. Good. So we're going to graph a couple points. The first point we're going to graph is we're going to graph the point 0, 0. So again, the generic way to write coordinate points, which you'll notice here are also called ordered pair, is x first, y second. So we're going to move in the x direction 0 and in the y direction 0. You'll notice I put a dot right on this space because we're not moving anywhere in the x direction or anywhere in the y direction. This is what we call the origin, which is ultimately the starting point for the graph. Okay? But it's tricky because when we look at our specific points, there's going to be a pattern to it. When we move to the right on our x-axis, our numbers will increase 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4. As we move the opposite way in the x direction, it's going to be in the same order, but we're going to be using negative numbers. So it'll be -1, and -2, -3, and so on. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are all -1, -2, -3, and so on. Okay? Same with y. So the positive direction, we're moving up, we will be same thing, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And can you guess what we would be doing if we're moving down? Right, -1, -2, -3, and so on. Okay? So you'll notice here, move to the right positive, move up positive. So every coordinate in our first quadrant are going to be values or an ordered pair that are positive. For example, 2, 4. We go over 2, up 4. So that'd be our point 2, 4. If we have values in our second quadrant, our values would be a negative and a positive, because we would be moving negative and then we would be moving positive. And again, same for the other quadrants. This quadrant here would be negative, negative, and this quadrant here would be positive, negative. Okay, so let's do a couple examples. If we have a plane here, a Cartesian plane or an x and y coordinate, we're going to graph some points. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to label our graph as best I can. Okay, so we're just going to do one unit, 1, 2, 3, 4, -1, -2, -3, -4. Be sure we label x and y, just so we know. +1, 2, 3, 4, -1, -2, -3, -4. Okay, so I want to put some points up here and I want you to graph them. Go ahead and graph 2, 2, 0, -1, 1, -1, and -0.5 and 2. And let's put one more. Let's do -1, -1. As you graph those, go ahead and be sure you recognize which quadrant they're graphed in. I'll go ahead and give you about a minute to do that. And by a minute I meant 30 seconds, so this video isn't too long, so let's go ahead and graph these. +2, +2. We're going to go over 2, up 2, there's our point. So that's our point 2, 2. Which quadrant? We are in quadrant 1 for that one. Okay, so let's erase that. Now let's move on to 0, -1. So we're going to start moving 0 either in the positive or negative x direction. But since it's 0, we're not moving anywhere. So we're just going to stay at 0, which is right here. But then we're going to move down -1 in the y direction. Okay, so this would be our point here, 0, -1. Now, which quadrant is that in? We are on the axis. Does it land in a quadrant? That's correct. So for this, it would be no specific quadrant, because we are actually on the y-axis. Good. So moving on to the next one. We are now at 1, -1. We go over +1, down -1. There we are. So we have 1, -1. We are in quadrant 4. All we're doing here is graphing points, guys. Now the next one is next one is -0.52. So we're not going to quite go over all the way 1, but we're going to go over -0.5, which is about right there, and we're going to move up 2. Which quadrant are we in now? Good. Quadrant 2. Awesome. And let's do our last one. We're doing a darker blue. -1, 1. Over -1, down -1. We are now in quadrant 3. Good work. So if this video made sense, go ahead and like it. And remember, today we are increasing our math swag. See you all next time.